W1g W2f Explanation deals with making sure that your details are clear through how you connect them back to your evidence and your claims. It's important to be able to do this both in writing and in speech so that people can better understand what it is that you're trying to say and why the details that you provide are actual proof. Starting at the 1 level with this target, we see that it asks that you be able to give explanation that connects details to evidence. In other words, tell why your details actually prove the evidence that you have matched them to. But you'll be missing some other items which will appear up in the rubric. At the 2 level, you can give explanation that gives context for the details and connects details to evidence, no connection to the claim though. At the 3 level proficiency, you can do all of those skills. You can provide context to your details, so you explain where they come from. You can connect your details to your evidence within the paragraph, and you can connect your evidence back to the claim. At a 4 level, you can do all of that, but you also need to do a close reading for subtle language use and details. And that will involve pulling specific words or phrases from the details that you're using and explaining why they in particular are significant. So the first piece of this is what comes before the details that you use in a paragraph or in speech. You need to give context. And I've given you a couple of different avenues that you might use. If you're dealing with a literary analysis piece and you've got something from a piece of literature that you're working with, in particular a quote, and it could also be a paraphrase, you'll need to choose either the author or the character as appropriate. For example, in this first piece or first detail from the poem that we've been working with, I've used the poet because there is no clear speaker other than the poet himself. So it's Owen who describes how the soldiers' boots wore out or were lost, but they limped on bloodshod. That's all I need for that piece of context, who and what Owen describes. For a character example, this comes from Harry Potter, you might recognize it, Snape quietly responded always. So I've used the character, and I'm going to go on after this to talk about why that particular quote from this particular character is significant. If you're dealing with some research that you've gathered, you're going to need to make sure you are clear about who said it or who gathered it, and what makes them knowledgeable. You need to give both. Are they an expert? Is it their job to deal with these things? For example, if you were writing a paper about some school-related topic and you'd interviewed Ms. Dupuy, you could say, Ms. Dupuy, high school principal, to qualify her, explained. If you were doing some research and the person doing the data that you used in your paper was John Smith, and he was a respected insect researcher, you'd want to make that clear so that people take your details more seriously. If it's a general fact and you don't have a particular person to accredit it to, do look to see what kind of organization put it together or what type of study it was. According to the 2010 study of student happiness, for example, we're giving a specific year in which it happened and what the study was of, and an informal study of 10 students revealed, again, who was involved and where did it come from, an informal study. After you've given your detail, you need to connect that detail back to the evidence. Ask yourself, why does this detail prove the evidence? The answer to that will be the explanation that you used. For example, in working with the 2 literary pieces here, Snape quietly responded always. That he has never stopped loving Lily reveals him to be a good character, not the antagonist first portrayed. We can imagine that the evidence that went with this detail was Snape is actually a good guy in the Harry Potter series. And this explanation ties into the fact that always is about him loving Lily always, and tying into him being a good character with the evidence statement. For the next detail from the poem itself, we can imagine that the evidence statement is the men's bodies, or the soldiers' bodies and minds were run down. We go into our detail. Owen describes how the soldiers' boots were wore out or lost, but they limped on bloodshod. To walk on bloodshod, and notice I pulled a very particular word here, and then I'm going to give it some significance. The feet are broken and bleeding, so that's a close reading, a 4 level. Reveals how run down the men's bodies were, connecting to the evidence statement that they were run down, and that this particular piece proves it because they were broken and bleeding. You do want to be careful not simply to repeat the detail when you are giving your explanation. Be sure you're fully answering the question, why does this detail prove the evidence? And again, for that 4 level, you've got to pull a key word, just as we did here with bloodshot, and tell exactly what it means. And that could be content related, it could be tone related, or it could be purpose related, not necessarily all 3. At the end of the paragraph, you want to connect the entire piece back to the claim. So ask yourself the question, why does this evidence and the details I've used to prove it prove the claim? The answer to that will be your mini so what at the end of the paragraph. That will help make that connection clear. So we've got a full paragraph here. You may have already seen it if you've already studied organization. The evidence begins, Owen paints a vivid image of rundown soldiers to show how damaging the war is on their bodies and minds. That's our evidence statement. He goes on to give his details. I'm not going to read them word for word, but we've got our quotes, the limped on bloodshot, and then also the deaf to the hoots of the bombs. We've got our explanation of the quotes, and you'll see here it's a little bit different than what we just saw. In this particular example, these two quotes were closely related, so I gave explanation of the quotes after both quotes. That's also acceptable. These men were so run down that they walked barefoot and bloody, ignoring the bombs, potential death which dropped among them. So that's a good example of an explanation after details that would connect it back to the evidence. Now, finally, that piece to connect it back to the whole evidence statement. All they could stand to do, is put one foot in front of the other, and this is what helps prove that they're run down, revealing how crushing war can be in the body and mind of the soldier, which connects back to our claim of the entire paragraph. Again, beware simply repeating either your claim or your evidence statement. Here's another example, and this is for the persuasive examples that we've been working with. Remember, the claim is the American education system should include more vocational training to better address the needs of the modern student and economy. We start with the evidence statement. The American economy needs both college graduates and vocational specialists. We give a context for our first detail. According to a study done by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, so there's our context before the detail, here's the actual detail. By 2018, nearly 1/3 of American job openings will require vocational training. That ends the detail. Now we need to connect that detail back to the evidence that the economy needs both college graduates and vocational specialists. 1/3 is a significant number of positions, and the nation's ability to fill them or not could have long-ranging effects on our economy. So economy, connecting back into the evidence. We're also doing close reading here. We're picking up on that very specific 1/3 in the detail for a 4-level explanation. Finally, we need to give a mini so what and connect back to the claim, which again is that we need more training. With such a high need for vocational workers, and this is what comes from this whole paragraph, there's a high need, that number proves it, it is important that more training be provided in secondary education, and there's our connection back to our claim. So, full paragraph example for persuasive essay, and of course the expository essay came earlier in this lecture.